I sat curled up on the tiny grey sofa in my new apartment on the east side of Atlanta, a lukewarm mug of peppermint tea cradled in one hand and my other hand resting on my forehead. The apartment was small, just a one-bedroom walk-up, but it was mine. No shared fridge, no guilt-filled grocery runs, no one calling me at 7 a.m. to fix something they broke. But even here, the past wasn't quiet. My phone blinked furiously on the chipped coffee table, lighting up with messages from my mother, my father, and my older brother, Seth. Over and over, those three names looped on my screen like sirens. I didn't answer. I hadn't answered in 6 months. Not since I walked out of that house and never looked back. No screaming match. No slammed doors. Just silence, and that, in our family, was louder than any goodbye. The day I left, the sun was setting behind the row of duplexes on Brookdale Avenue. I'd packed a single duffel bag with some clothes, my work laptop, and a stack of old finance journals I couldn't seem to throw away. No one asked where I was going. No one noticed I wasn't dressed for work. My mom was watching her soap opera, my dad was hunched over a spreadsheet of car payments, and Seth was buried in his gaming console like he had been since high school. I stepped outside without a sound, as invisible walking out as I had been living in. That's what I was in the Monroe family, the silent achiever, the invisible net catching everyone else's fall. I paid the late bills, bought the new tires, and covered Seth's online classes after he quit his 4th job. I used to think doing all that was what made me strong. But sitting in this apartment now, surrounded by stillness I didn't have to earn, I realized I had never been strong. I had just been conditioned to survive. I was 29 years old. I had a degree in finance, graduated with honors, and worked at a consulting firm downtown where my manager called me the glue of our division. But at home, I was the backup plan, the quiet one who never complained, the one who magically had it together enough to take care of everything. Seth was the golden child, even when he failed. When he flunked out of community college, Mom said, "He's just figuring himself out." When he quit his job at the bookstore, Dad said, "No one likes a micromanager anyway." When I landed a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, the only comment was, "Couldn't you have picked a school closer to home? Seth might need the car." When I got promoted last year, Mom sighed and asked if I could start driving them to their medical appointments more often. I used to tell myself that being useful was enough. That if I just stayed loyal, they'd eventually appreciate me. But instead, the more I gave, the more I vanished. I wasn't the favorite. I was just the most accessible. 6 months ago, I got a message from Mom while I was at work. "Your dad forgot the power bill again. We're sitting in the dark. Can you help?" I wired $1,100 that same night and sent a gentle reminder, "Just keep an eye on it next month, okay?" She didn't reply. But the next week came another request. "Seth wants to sign up for a design course, just needs a little boost." A little boost turned into $300. Then came the new tires, the roof leak, the dental bill. I wasn't just helping. I was funding their life while living off noodles and postponing my first mortgage down payment again. I remember standing in a grocery store one night, staring at a carton of eggs I couldn't afford because I'd just wired money for Seth's birthday weekend, and thinking, this isn't support. This is sacrifice without consent. And no one noticed. So I walked. And now, in this little box apartment with creaky floors and second-hand curtains, I finally had something I never did in that house, a boundary. 3 weeks after I left, the silence wasn't peaceful anymore, it was terrifying. Not because I missed them, but because I expected the guilt to come knocking harder. And it did. First came the soft, almost sweet texts from Mom. "Just checking on you, sweetheart. It's been quiet." Then, "Your dad's back is acting up again. We're short on his medication this month." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew what came next. I'd send the money, she'd thank me with a thumbs up emoji, and a week later I'd get a new message from Seth. "Can you send $150? Just till payday." Except there never was a payday. Not for him. That's the thing about being the dependable one, when you stop answering, they don't reflect. They panic. By week 5, the texts turned into voicemails. From Dad. "Hey Alyssa, your mom's real worried. We haven't heard from you. I know things have been tough, but the gas bill's due and we're kind of in a bind. It was never how are you? Always what can you cover? I blocked their numbers. Not out of spite, but because I'd spent a decade watching my own life shrink while theirs coasted on my income. I lived in a tight budget studio while they bought a new recliner because Dad's back needed support. I cancelled my only vacation last year because Seth wanted to invest in his art and needed money for a digital tablet. I started tracking the money I sent just to see it laid bare. Over the past 24 months. Over $22,000. That didn't count groceries, favors, or Uber rides to their medical appointments. I had been holding up a house I didn't live in, for a family who never once asked if I was sleeping at night. Blocking them wasn't a betrayal. It was the first act of self-preservation. And even then, I still wondered. What if they needed me for real? The calls didn't stop. They just came from different numbers. Voicemails started sounding angrier. You think you're better than us now? Wow, guess money really changed you. Mom's been crying for days. If something happens to Dad, it's on you. I'd sit with those words swirling in my head after work, unsure if I was being heartless or finally brave. I didn't hate them. I just didn't trust them with access to me anymore. That's a boundary most people don't talk about. We love family. But loving them shouldn't mean handing them the keys to everything we are. The weight of being the good daughter had warped into a full-time job I didn't apply for. I was expected to give and expected to feel bad if I stopped. And they knew exactly how to hit those guilt buttons, so I turned them off. I got a new phone. New email. New emergency contact. Because healing sometimes looks like building a firewall between you and the people you love most. But even behind the wall, they found cracks. It started with a voicemail that made my stomach twist. If the house gets taken, that's on you. No hello. No pretense. Just pressure. I hadn't paid a single mortgage bill in 6 months, and that was intentional. I had told them before I left, I'm done. I can't keep funding the house. I'd said it quietly, nervously, half hoping they'd say, we understand. But they didn't. They never planned to stop leaning on me. And when the support ended, the blame began. It started with a text from Dad. The tone was short, almost routine. Bank's been calling again. The house might go under if we don't figure this out soon. I stared at it for a long time. There wasn't a single mention of the $3,000 I sent over the last few months before I left, none of which I'd ever followed up on. I used to think checking up on money meant I didn't trust them. Now I realized not checking was the mistake. I'd been sending payments into a black hole and assuming they were doing the right thing. My hands shook as I opened my laptop that night. I hadn't logged into the family mortgage account since college. I didn't even know if I still had access. But I remembered the login Dad once gave me in case of emergency. This felt like an emergency. The screen loaded slowly, the spinning wheel taunting me. Then it appeared. Past due, 8 months. Outstanding balance, $6,480. Status, final notice. I froze. My heartbeat thudded like a drum in my ears. I scrolled back through the history. The last mortgage payment was made 2 months before I even left. That couldn't be right. I sent money for 3 more months after that for the house. I sent it right to Dad's account. Rent. Repairs. Groceries. Utilities. Not just in chunks, but with clear notes, for the house. Electric bill. Mortgage support. And they never told me a single word about being behind. Not once. Every month they said they needed help. Every month I transferred. And every month they made me believe I was keeping a roof over their heads. But the roof was already cracking. They just wanted someone else to hold it up while they pretended everything was fine. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I felt something worse. Hollow. Like someone had hollowed out everything I thought I was doing right, and left behind the echo of being used. The next morning, I called the bank myself. I gave them the account details and asked if I could get a confirmation about payment history. The woman on the phone was polite. Calm. Like it wasn't wild that a grown woman had to fact-check her own father. Yes. The last full mortgage payment was made 8 months ago. Since then, there's been no activity. The home is under collections review. I thanked her. Hung up. Then sat in the stillness of my apartment, phone in my lap, heart racing. Where had the money gone? What else had they lied about? It wasn't just the house anymore, it was every dollar I ever sent. The meds, the groceries, Seth's classes, the car. Was any of it real? Or had I just been a walking, breathing direct deposit? I called Dad that evening. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. He answered on the third ring. Alyssa. I was just about to call you. Stop, I said. I checked. The mortgage hasn't been paid in 8 months. I kept sending money for 3 after that. What happened? There was a pause. A long one. Then a sigh. It's not what you think. Things just spiraled. We needed the money elsewhere. Seth needed help. The roof. So you didn't pay the mortgage, I said. You lied. You let me keep paying, thinking I was saving the house. Mom grabbed the phone then. I could hear her voice rising. You don't understand how hard things have been. You left, and we were drowning. I left after I paid everything for years, I snapped. And the one time I walked away, you acted like I abandoned you. But you stopped being honest way before I stopped being generous. Seth's voice suddenly appeared in the background. You're being dramatic. It's not like we went on vacations with your money. No. Just lied about using it to keep a roof over their heads. I ended the call. Not because I was angry, but because I finally saw the truth. They weren't just dependent on me. They had built their entire life around my silence. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in 6 months. The sky was grey, the kind of weather that felt heavy even without confrontation looming. I wasn't coming with groceries, or an envelope of cash, or a guilty heart trying to make things right. I came with the truth. That alone was enough to feel like armor. I parked across the street and sat in my car for a moment, breathing. The house hadn't changed, same faded beige siding, same cracked driveway, same overgrown hedge that Seth always promised to trim. As I stepped onto the porch and knocked, I felt a stillness in my chest I hadn't known before. Mom opened the door. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Alyssa, she said. Like it tasted foreign. I walked in, passing the hallway where I used to hang my coat and drop grocery bags. Dad was on the couch. Seth, as always, was stretched out beside him, controller in hand. Nothing had changed. I set my purse down and folded my arms. I spoke with the bank, I said. The mortgage is 8 months behind. The money I sent wasn't used. Mom flinched. Dad looked away. Seth paused the game. No one's denying we're behind, Dad said slowly. But things got complicated. We didn't know how to tell you. You didn't know how to tell me while you were still accepting my money. I asked, voice sharp. You knew exactly how to ask for $1,100 for the power bill, but not how to mention the roof over your head was slipping away. Mom stepped in, her tone defensive. We thought we could catch up. We didn't want to worry you. You didn't want to lose me, I corrected. Because if I knew the truth, you knew I'd stop. That's when Seth scoffed. You act like this house was your job. Like we owe you something. I turned slowly toward him. I don't want anything from you. I never did. But I do want honesty. And all I've gotten is silence, lies, and demands. He smirked. It's not like you're starving. You live alone, work a fancy job, drink lattes, and drive around like you're some self-made millionaire. I took a deep breath. And I earned every bit of that. While you sat here, asking me to fund your dreams while calling me selfish for wanting to breathe. Mom's voice rose sharply. If it's such a burden, Alyssa, then don't do it. No one's forcing you. That was it. The moment. The final crack in the glass. I stared at her, the woman who raised me, the one who used to kiss my forehead when I was sick and praise me for being so mature. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. No music. No GPS. Just the hum of the road and the fading sound of my brother's smug voice echoing in my ears. You think you're a martyr or something? That's what stuck with me, not because it hurt, but because it was the most honest thing he'd said in years. To him, I wasn't a sister. I was a bank account with arms. I got home just as the sun was slipping behind the trees outside my balcony. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I changed into an old hoodie, warmed up leftover rice, and sat on the couch watching the shadows dance across the floor. This was the life I chose, a simple one. A quiet one. But that night, it felt like the silence was starting to bleed. I checked my phone around midnight. 5 missed calls. 2 from Dad. 1 from Mom. And 2 from Seth. The latest voicemail read, "You don't get to walk away and feel proud of it. If they lose the house, Alyssa, that's on you." I sat frozen, staring at the screen like it had insulted me personally. My first reaction was disbelief. Then came the heat. The rage. I replayed the message, this time putting the phone on speaker, letting the venom swirl around my apartment like smoke. If they lose the house, that's on you. Not, we're sorry. Not, we messed up. Just blame. I had drained myself financially, emotionally, physically, for years. I'd skipped meals so they could keep the lights on. I'd cancelled my first vacation in 5 years because the water heater went out again. I'd handed over paychecks to keep Seth in another dead-end course. And now that I stopped being their safety net, their only plan was to point fingers. That was the moment I realized. They weren't calling because they loved me. They were calling because the ship was sinking. And the person who used to bail it out had finally walked away with the bucket. I typed out a reply text. My thumbs trembled, not from fear, but from holding in too many things for too long. I covered the mortgage for 2 years. I paid utilities, groceries, meds, school fees, and car repairs. I did it without complaint. I did it without asking for anything back. And now, after all of that, you blame me because I stopped. If the house is lost, it's not because I walked away. It's because no one else stepped up. I hovered over send. But I didn't press it. Because deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a scapegoat. And I was done being the family's punching bag dressed in kindness. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 a.m. as usual. Made coffee. Opened the window. And told myself out loud, "You are not responsible for what grown adults refuse to handle." I played the voicemail one more time before deleting it. Because that sentence. That was the last straw. I didn't plan to break down. Not in front of anyone. Not even Lauren. For years I'd trained myself to smile when I was tired, laugh when I was worried, and say I'm good even when I hadn't slept in days because my parents were behind on a bill again. But that Sunday evening, something cracked. I showed up at her apartment unannounced, holding a half-eaten muffin and 2 cups of gas station coffee. She opened the door in pajama pants and a satin bonnet, blinking at me in surprise. "I know it's late," I said. I need to talk to someone who won't make me feel crazy." She didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug. I collapsed into her couch, the same one we used to crash on during study nights, and I told her everything. From the first payment to the blocked numbers. From Seth's voicemail to the mortgage betrayal. The lies. The manipulation. The way my body physically ached from years of silent giving. And she listened. No interruptions. No advice. Just a safe space I didn't even realize I needed. When I finally stopped talking, there was a long silence between us. The kind of silence that only exists between people who truly love you, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then Lauren asked me one question, and it shattered me more than any scream or sob ever could. "Alyssa, when was the last time someone in your family did something for you that wasn't tied to money?" I blinked. My throat tightened. My brain scrambled to find a single moment, one thoughtful gesture, one surprise birthday, one, "You okay?" that didn't follow a request. Nothing came. Not from childhood. Not from my teens. Not even recently. Every act of love had always been entangled with need. If they called, it was to ask for something. If they texted, it was to pull me back in. I couldn't recall a single time my mom made my favorite dinner just because, or Seth offered to help with anything without being guilted into it. That kind of care didn't exist in our house. I swallowed hard. I don't know, I said. My voice was thin. I don't think they ever have. Lauren reached over and held my hand. Her grip was gentle but firm, like she was trying to pass me some of the strength I'd been giving everyone else. That's not okay, she whispered. And you need to stop treating it like it is. I let the words sink in. They didn't feel like judgment. They felt like permission. Permission to let go of the stories I'd told myself. Permission to stop feeling guilty for protecting myself. Permission to grieve a version of family that had never actually existed. I realized I'd been waiting my whole life for them to wake up and see me not as a provider or a problem solver, but as a person. I kept thinking if I gave more, fixed more, sacrificed more, they'd eventually say, "You've done enough. Rest." But that moment never came. And the hardest part wasn't their neglect, it was realizing I'd built my entire identity around being useful to people who didn't value me outside of that role. I wasn't their daughter. I was their insurance plan. Their bailout fund. Their guilt-free excuse to avoid growing up. And I had let it happen again and again. But now, I was done being the fallback. Lauren looked at me, her eyes soft but serious. "You know what I think," she said. "I think you didn't just walk away from them. You walked toward yourself. And that's the bravest thing anyone can do." Tears welled in my eyes, not because of pain, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt understood. I didn't say much after that. We just sat there, letting the weight of it settle, letting the truth breathe. For years, I had been surviving. Now, maybe, just maybe, I could start living. After that night at Lauren's, I went home and wrote one thing in my journal: I don't need to be useful to be loved. I underlined it 3 times. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, made coffee without checking my phone, and sat by the window watching the city rise. It felt like breathing without weight on my chest. That was new. Usually, mornings were a sprint, working overtime, double-checking my transfers, making sure no emergency from home had landed in my inbox overnight. But now, the silence didn't scare me. It healed me. I started small. I removed my parents' bank account from my list of saved transfers. I unsubscribed from email alerts for their utility bills. I deleted the budget spreadsheet I used to update every week for their expenses. It was strange how something so small could feel like cutting off oxygen. But it wasn't oxygen. It was exhaust. And slowly, I stopped letting it choke me. That same week, I made my first real purchase in almost a year: an ergonomic desk chair. I'd been working on a dining chair since the pandemic started. Every night my back would ache, but I never upgraded because there was always something more important to pay for. But this time, I didn't ask anyone. I just clicked buy now and waited for the delivery like a kid on Christmas. When it arrived, I built it myself. No borrowed tools, no help. Just me, a screwdriver, and 2 hours of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just a chair. It was a decision that said, I matter too. From there, other small changes came. I enrolled in a weekend class on digital marketing, something I'd always wanted to learn but kept postponing. I started meal prepping instead of skipping dinners. I finally replaced the flickering light in my bathroom. These weren't grand gestures. They were tiny flags planted in my own soil. Proof that I could build a life that wasn't about fixing others, but about creating peace for myself. People started noticing the change. My coworkers said I looked more rested. My boss pulled me aside to ask if I wanted to lead a new project, something I'd always been too busy or burnt out to consider. Even Lauren said, "You're glowing differently." I laughed, but I felt it. I was lighter. Not because the burden was gone, it still knocked on the door from time to time. Old voicemails, blocked numbers, guilt-shaped shadows on quiet nights. But now I had something stronger: boundaries. I still hadn't responded to my family. Not because I hated them, but because responding meant reopening the wound before it fully scabbed over. And I wasn't ready for that. I might never be. And that was okay. One afternoon, I stood in front of a small apartment mirror and said out loud, "You're allowed to rest." You're allowed to grow. You're allowed to stop running back into the fire just because someone you love refuses to move. That affirmation? I repeated it every morning for weeks. Eventually, I stopped waiting for the guilt to vanish. Instead, I just got stronger than it. That was the real freedom. Not living a perfect life, but living one that finally belonged to me. It came on a Wednesday. I had just finished a client presentation and was walking home through Piedmont Park, sipping a smoothie and enjoying the early evening breeze. I hadn't checked my voicemail in weeks. I told myself I was done with that cycle, the late-night guilt trips, the long-winded justifications, the shaky promises to do better. But curiosity has a way of creeping in when things go quiet for too long. I opened my voicemail box more out of habit than intent, and there it was, one new message, time-stamped that morning. It was from Dad. Not from a blocked number. Not from Seth. Just Dad. I braced myself, already expecting the same script. But the first line made me stop walking. Alyssa, I know you probably won't call back. And you don't have to. I need to say this. His voice was tired, lower than usual. Slower. There was no anger in it. No guilt tripping. Just something that almost sounded like shame. You were right. About everything. About the mortgage. About how we used you. About how we didn't say thank you nearly enough, maybe ever. My breath caught. He paused, and in that pause, I could feel him struggling to find the words. Your mom doesn't know I'm calling. She'd be upset. But I needed to say this without yelling, without begging. You gave more than anyone should have been asked to. And we got used to it. That's on us. He exhaled into the phone, and the crackle of wind on his end made it feel like he was sitting outside too, wrestling with what to say next. I don't expect anything from you. Just. I hope someday, when you're ready, you'll forgive me. Not for the bills. Not for the lies. But for making you feel like love had to be earned. The message ended. No second voicemail followed. Just one simple, stunning confession. And it left me standing under a blooming tree in the middle of the park, unable to move. My chest ached, not with sadness, but with the weight of something I hadn't felt from him in years, sincerity. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase everything. But it was the first time he didn't ask me to fix something. The first time he didn't blame me for being gone. Just a man owning his failure. That night, I didn't call him back. I didn't delete the voicemail either. I saved it. And then I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at my phone for a long time. My fingers hovered over the call button more than once. But I didn't press it. Because something in me knew. Even a long overdue apology doesn't automatically reopen a door that's been sealed shut for your own survival. I loved my dad. I always had. But love doesn't mean handing someone a weapon after they finally admit they've hurt you. It just means you set the weapon down and walk away before it ever cuts you again. For a while I thought forgiveness meant letting people back in. But now I understood something deeper. Forgiveness doesn't always have to end with reunion. Sometimes, it's just an acknowledgement. A quiet release. An unspoken peace. So I whispered thank you into the stillness of my apartment that night. Not because I was ready to go back. But because I was finally ready to move forward without bitterness in my chest. He told the truth. And I heard it. But I was no longer the same daughter he'd once expected to carry everything on her back. This version of me, she was lighter. And she wasn't turning around. The letter came 3 days later. A plain white envelope slid beneath my apartment door, forwarded from my old mailing address. No return name, just a stamped label from a financial institution I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a credit card offer or a mistake. But when I opened it, my hands started shaking. Final notice of foreclosure. The house I grew up in, the house I helped pay for, patch up, and preserve through every financial crisis, was officially at risk of being reclaimed by the bank. I scanned the details. Over $9,000 in back payments. Auction pending. Response required within 15 days. It felt like a punch to the ribs. Not because I didn't know it was coming, but because it was real now. Documented. Official. I laid the letter on the kitchen counter and just stared at it. I thought about the hallway where my mom used to tape up my spelling tests. The corner where my dad installed the coat hooks I was too short to reach. The old sofa where Seth used to hog the TV while I did homework on the floor. That house wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol. And now, it was crumbling. I didn't cry. I just sat down and folded my hands, whispering one question over and over: am I responsible for this? I thought about calling Lauren. I thought about replaying my dad's voicemail. But in the end, I just sat with myself because no one else could make this decision for me. I knew what they would expect. That I'd swoop in, just like always. Make the call. Write the check. Save them at the very last minute. Be the invisible daughter who shows up even when no one sees her. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. She had died the day they lied about the mortgage and then told me losing the house would be my fault. And yet, part of me still cared. Not about comfort. Not even about forgiveness. But about closure. I wanted this chapter to end on my terms, not theirs. So I pulled out my laptop, opened a blank email, and typed a message to their mortgage lender. I am not a co-owner or responsible party, but I'd like to offer a one-time payment to assist in resolving the outstanding balance without future obligation or contact. I sat with the words. Then deleted the last line. Then retyped it. Because if I did this, it wouldn't be to fix them. It would be to free myself once and for all. The bank responded the next morning. They were willing to accept a partial payment to delay the foreclosure. $3,500. Just enough to buy time, but not enough to erase the damage. I could afford it. Barely. But this time, I wasn't going to pay quietly. I called my dad. First time in months. He answered on the first ring. Alyssa, I got the letter, I said. Silence. Then, I didn't mean for it to come to you, I know. Another pause. Are you going to help? I closed my eyes. I'll make one payment. Just one. Not because you asked. But because I need to close this chapter. After this, I'm done. No calls. No texts. No favors. We're not going back to the old dynamic. His voice cracked. I understand. And this time, I believed him. I wired the payment that afternoon. Not with shame. Not with resentment. But with the same mindset I use when I finally delete an old file I'll never need again. Not out of hate. But because holding on was slowing down everything else. Helping someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It means knowing when to stop. 2 weeks passed. The house didn't go into foreclosure. Not yet. My payment bought them just enough time to figure things out on their own. But I didn't ask what happened next. I didn't check in. I didn't follow up. That single payment wasn't a re-entry into their lives, it was a farewell gift. The closing of a tab I'd been forced to open as a teenager and told would never end. And for the first time, they didn't ask for more. There were no voicemails. No while you're at it messages. Just silence. And in that silence, I healed. I started spending more time in my neighborhood, reading again in the small cafe near the corner, picking up free community classes, learning how to make peace with quiet instead of fearing it. I reconnected with myself the way I used to try and reconnect with them. And slowly, I stopped waiting for their validation like a dog waiting at the door. Because I wasn't seeking closure anymore, I'd already created it. One Sunday morning, I walked through Piedmont Park under a sky so blue it almost looked painted. I passed a young girl sitting on a bench, laptop open, brows furrowed like the world rested on her shoulders. Her phone rang. She answered it with that soft, polite tone. Yes, Dad, I'll send it by tonight. I froze for a second. It was like looking in a mirror I hadn't seen in years. I wanted to walk over, sit beside her, and say, "You're not selfish for wanting peace. You're not cruel for saying no. Being reliable doesn't mean you owe people your soul." But I didn't say anything. I just nodded to her as I passed, and she nodded back, like maybe she knew I understood. Because I did. I understood too well. That night, I pulled out my old journal. The one I hadn't touched in months. I flipped past the scribbled budgets, the shame-filled entries, the pages where I had tried to rationalize being everything for everyone except myself. On the last page, I wrote something new. My name is Alyssa Monroe. I am not a bank. I am not a fixer. I am a woman who gave too much and finally chose herself. I'm not cold. I'm clear. I'm not broken. I'm rebuilding. I'm not heartless. I just stopped giving mine away without return. Then I closed the journal and tucked it into the back of my bookshelf. Not to forget, but to remind myself, whenever I needed it, how far I had come. I still don't know what happened to the house. Maybe Seth stepped up. Maybe they sold it. Maybe it's still on the edge. But I know one thing for certain. I'm not the one holding it up anymore. And that doesn't make me the villain. It makes me free. Do not forget to subscribe to get more stories from us.